There's a silent danger that strikes without warning, and it's especially common in the morning hours. Yet most seniors have no idea how close they are to it. Every year, millions of older adults around the world experience a stroke. In fact, strokes are the second leading cause of death globally, and one of the top reasons seniors lose their independence, their mobility, and even their ability to speak. But what if I told you that one simple habit, done consistently in the morning, could slash that risk by up to 50%? This isn't a miracle cure. It's not a new drug or expensive therapy. It's a small change backed by powerful scientific research that has been hiding in plain sight for decades. And yet, very few seniors are taking advantage of it. Why? Because too many of us believe that protecting our health means waiting for problems and reacting to them. But real health, the kind that lasts, protects, and empowers, starts with what you do each day, especially in the first hour after you wake up. In this video, we'll reveal why the morning is the most dangerous time of day for your heart and brain, what your body is secretly doing between 6 and 11 a.m. that increases your stroke risk, and most importantly, the one simple morning habit that dramatically reduces your chances of stroke, improves blood flow to your brain, and keeps you mentally sharp. This habit doesn't require fancy equipment, a gym membership, or even leaving your house. You can do it no matter your age, your mobility level, or your current health status. And once it becomes a part of your routine, the benefits extend far beyond stroke prevention. It boosts your mood, your memory, your energy, and your confidence. If you've been feeling slower lately, if you've had trouble with balance, memory, or blood pressure, or if you're just trying to protect your brain as you age, don't skip this, because this might be the most important advice you hear this year. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. At Daily Elder Advice, we share practical, science-backed guidance to help you live longer, feel stronger, and age with purpose and dignity. Every video is crafted with care to support you, your health, and the legacy you're still building. So stay with us. What you're about to discover may not only extend your life, it may completely change the quality of your mornings and your future. First, let's talk about why mornings matter more than most people realize. Most strokes don't happen at night. They don't happen while you're sleeping or winding down in the evening. In fact, according to several neurological studies, the majority of strokes occur in the early morning hours, usually between 6 a.m. and noon. Why? It all comes down to how your body naturally functions throughout the day. You see, our bodies operate on a circadian rhythm, an internal 24-hour clock that governs everything from our hormones to our blood pressure to how our brain responds to stress. When we wake up, especially after age 60, a few key things happen almost instantly. Our blood pressure surges. This is a natural response to help us go from a state of rest to wakefulness. But for seniors, that sudden spike can become dangerous, especially for those with hypertension or fragile blood vessels. Platelet activity increases. That means your blood gets stickier, more prone to clotting. Again, this is normal, but when combined with elevated blood pressure, it raises the risk of clot formation in the arteries leading to your brain. Your blood vessels are stiffer. As we age, arteries lose some of their elasticity. Early morning stiffness adds strain, particularly in colder weather or when you rise suddenly from bed. Now imagine all three of those things happening together: higher blood pressure, stickier blood, and less flexible arteries, right when you're getting out of bed. That's the perfect storm for a stroke to strike. But here's the good news. You're not helpless in the face of this risk. In fact, there's a small window of opportunity in the morning, usually within your first 60 to 90 minutes of wakefulness, when doing the right thing can not only neutralize those risks, but actually strengthen your cardiovascular system over time. And that's where this one simple morning habit comes in. Before we go into the specifics of the habit, let's understand one thing clearly. Most seniors are not dying because of age, they're dying because of accumulated risk. And risk builds quietly, day by day, habit by habit, or lack thereof. That's why making a purposeful shift in your morning routine may be the most powerful health decision you can make this year, not just for stroke prevention, but for sharper thinking, better mobility, and longer independence. In the next section, I'll walk you through exactly what this habit is, how it protects your brain and heart, and why it's particularly effective when done in the morning, not later in the day. And don't worry, it's simple. You won't need any equipment, you won't break a sweat, and you can do it whether you're 61 or 91. Let's begin. Second, here's the morning habit that could cut your stroke risk in half. So, what is the morning habit that can cut your stroke risk by up to 50%? It's not a fancy supplement, not a complex breathing technique, and definitely not something reserved for athletes. It's simple, gentle morning movement. Just 15 to 30 minutes of light physical activity shortly after you wake up, done consistently, can make a profound difference in your cardiovascular health. You don't need a gym membership or high-impact exercise. In fact, you shouldn't aim for intensity at all. What your body needs is calm, purposeful movement to ease into the day. This habit helps your blood vessels expand by naturally boosting nitric oxide, which keeps them flexible and lowers internal pressure. That's essential because stiff or narrowed vessels are one of the biggest contributors to stroke. Morning movement also stabilizes your blood pressure, particularly important because most strokes occur in the early hours when blood pressure naturally spikes. You're essentially resetting your system, preparing it to handle the day more safely. And the benefits don't stop there. Moving in the morning boosts circulation, delivering oxygen-rich blood to your brain, muscles, and heart. It reduces inflammation, one of the silent destroyers of vascular health. And it helps regulate your energy, mood, and memory throughout the day. If you're able to walk, take a gentle stroll around your house, garden, or down the street for 15 minutes. If walking is difficult, don't worry, you still have options. Try seated leg lifts, slow arm circles, or even marching in place next to a sturdy surface for balance. The goal isn't to break a sweat. The goal is to wake up your muscles, activate your heart, and loosen up your joints. Most importantly, do it in the morning. Movement in the early hours is far more protective against stroke than the same activity done later in the day. You're meeting the risk head-on at the time your body is most vulnerable, and the impact builds with consistency. Doing it once won't change much, but doing it every morning, even just for 10 minutes, will strengthen your entire cardiovascular system over time. This habit isn't just about avoiding strokes. It's about reclaiming your morning, your clarity, and your strength. Instead of starting your day in stillness or stress, start it with gentle action. It may seem small, but it sends a powerful message to your body. We're moving, we're alive, and we're taking care of ourselves today. But if all of this still feels abstract, if you're wondering whether a few quiet steps in the morning can really change anything, let me share with you a story, a true one. Because sometimes it takes seeing what this habit looks like in a real person's life to understand just how powerful it can be. Not a theory, not a study, but a woman who almost didn't make it, until she decided to take control of her mornings. Her name was Lillian, and her story begins with a moment that almost ended everything. Her name was Lillian. She was 76 years old when her life almost slipped away before breakfast. Lillian lived alone in a small, quiet neighborhood just outside of St. Louis. Her husband had passed 5 years prior, and though her children called often, she spent most mornings in silence, sipping weak coffee, flipping through old photo albums, and waiting for the hours to pass. One cold winter morning, Lillian woke up with a strange tightness in her chest. Her left hand felt a bit numb and her head foggy. She thought it might just be the weather, maybe low blood sugar. She sat still and waited for it to pass. It didn't. Within 10 minutes, she collapsed to the kitchen floor. Her neighbor, Jack, a retired firefighter who walked his dog every morning at exactly 8, 5 a.m., happened to see Lillian's front door slightly open. He walked over, called out, and found her barely conscious. Because of his training, he recognized the signs of a stroke instantly and called for help. Lillian survived, but barely. The doctors told her something she would never forget. If you had gotten up and walked, even for 5 minutes, your blood would have moved just enough to prevent the clot from forming. You were seconds away from never waking up again. That moment shook her. During recovery, she made herself a promise, one she wrote on a sticky note and placed by her bed. Get up, get moving every morning, no matter what. And that's exactly what she did. At first, it was painful. Her legs were weak, her balance unsteady, and every step made her afraid she might fall. But she pushed through. With a walker, then a cane, and eventually on her own 2 feet, Lillian began walking 10 minutes every morning just around her tiny garden. Weeks turned into months. Her blood pressure stabilized. Her memory, which had been fading, sharpened again. Her doctors reduced her medications. Most incredibly of all, she found a new sense of joy, a rhythm in her day that made her feel alive again. She started smiling more, cooking again, even writing short poems about the sunrise. 1 year after her stroke, Lillian shared her story at a community health seminar. Standing confidently in front of a room full of seniors, she said something that made everyone sit up straighter. I thought I was getting older. I thought I was slowing down because of age. But the truth is, I was stopping. My body was begging me to move. And when I finally listened, it gave me a second chance. Lillian is 82 now. She still walks every morning. Not fast, not far, but always with purpose. Her story reminds us that stroke prevention isn't just about medication or hospital visits. Sometimes, it's about the choices we make while the coffee brews, the steps we take before the world even fully wakes up. And for Lillian, those small steps turned into a long, beautiful second chapter. So what can we take from Lillian's story? It's simple but profound. Motion is life. Not extreme motion, not marathons or intense workouts, but intentional movement, especially in the morning, has the power to rewrite your future. Lillian didn't need a miracle, she needed a decision. A small but powerful shift in mindset that said, today, I choose to move forward even if it's just 10 steps. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. You don't have to wait for a health scare to start listening to your body. You don't need a perfect schedule or a doctor's prescription to begin moving with purpose. Because deep down, your body is already whispering what it needs: circulation, breath, energy, renewal. Each morning is a blank page, and what you do in the first 30 minutes has a ripple effect on your heart, your brain, and your entire day. You can either stay still and let risk build up quietly, or take even the smallest step and begin to reclaim strength, clarity, and confidence. Lillian's transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened one gentle morning at a time, and the same is possible for you. So tomorrow, before the rush of the day begins, before anyone else asks for your time, give that time to yourself. Stand, stretch, walk, breathe, feel your heart thank you, and most of all, remember, it's never too late to take your health back into your hands. And there you have it, one simple morning habit that holds the power to transform your health, protect your brain, and give you back control of your aging journey. We often wait for warning signs, for diagnoses, for the big moment to finally act. But true prevention doesn't wait. It whispers, it nudges, and it lives in the choices we make when the world is still quiet, like how we start our mornings. So if you take just one thing from this video, let it be this. Your body is not asking for perfection. It's asking for consistency. A few minutes of movement each morning, done with care and intention, may be the very thing that adds not just years to your life, but life to your years. If this message resonated with you, if you felt a shift, a realization, or even a spark of motivation, we hope you'll carry it with you tomorrow morning, and the next after that. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up so more people can discover this life-saving advice. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode of Daily Elder Advice. We release thoughtful, science-based videos just like this, all designed to help you live longer, feel stronger, and age with confidence and purpose. This channel is built for you to honor your journey, your wisdom, and your strength. And we're honored to be part of it. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of your mornings and they'll take care of your life. Until next time, stay well and keep walking forward.